guys can stop us and ask questions if you have them. We'll try to call on people if you guys need a clarification as we're going. But that's the basic idea. We're going to give you guys 5 steps that we feel are important to becoming a great putter. So, you want to start it up?
Yeah, first thing we, like I said, building blocks is stance. You want to be comfortable with your stance. For me, my stance is just a little bit over shoulder width apart, and I don't point my toe directly at it because that'll face my hips right at the basket. That kind of cuts off my arm movement. So I like to point my toe, inward a little bit and have my back foot almost at a 90-degree angle. That's my preferred stance. People are different, but for me, that's where I feel like I get my best balance, and I get hills and things like that. I can factor that in. So a little bit further than shoulder width apart. And, for me, that's it.
Yeah, and stance we think can be an overlooked thing. To make a great putt and to be centered and able to make a repeatable motion, it's really important to be in an athletic stance and be feeling like you're in a balanced place. We see too many people that are going to be kind of like too heavy on one leg or back on another and kind of ended up tiring themselves out, as hard as that sounds to do. But if you're kind of in an awkward place and you're like getting ready and it gets a little windy, you can actually end up being fatigued in one leg or the other, or any stance that you're taking that's not really very comfortable. So for me, I'm primarily a straddle putter when I'm in close. So my stance is going to be straight on. I also am going to be about shoulder width apart, and I'm going to have my knees bent, and I'm going to just make sure that I feel like I'm in a position where I can transfer my weight pretty freely to wherever I need to. Because sometimes you got to go a little bit more to one side, a little more to another side, whatever that is. So just the reason that it's important to make sure that you're just in a balanced place so that you can have that repeatable good motion on your putt, because putting is kind of a delicate thing, as we all know. If you're just putting a bunch of power on it, that's going to be a problem. So you're going to need to start from that good balanced place. That's why we have stance as our number one important thing to be able to be a successful putter. You want number 2? Number 2. We're breaking them down in phases. So number 1 is the stance phase. Number 2 is the focus phase. Well, Paul will give you a little some tips about that, and then I'll go into it.
Yeah, so focus phase, again, everyone is different for focus. Some people like to, give 3 pumps. That's, them getting into their focus phase. For me, I just stand here, honestly. I don't do any pumps or anything like that. I like to just focus on getting my back foot. A lot of you guys will see me dig my back foot in. That I've learned through the years. I've tried to push off that back leg before, and the ground is just giving out. So that's basically me getting into that focus phase, getting comfortable, making sure my legs are there, my feet are, apart, the stance is good. That's me getting into my focus phase. And I like to just keep my arm here and focus on this back leg, make sure that's loading, which is next, loading. But yeah, that's basically me getting into that focus phase of not thinking about anything, and then just going into the mental side of practice is where I put all my time in.
For me, all he's saying is true for me as well. For me, I just sit here doing this kind of idly. This is kind of a little move that I've become known for. I didn't ever plan to do it, but it's just something that I do while I'm standing there getting ready to putt. For me, focusing is important just to take that little bit of time to breathe, make sure that I'm like using positive thoughts, as kind of cheesy as that sounds, but like as I'm getting ready to putt, I want to make sure that I'm ready to putt. You don't want to be in a place where you feel, I'm sure you guys have all felt that, where you kind of feel like, oh geez, kind of went, and then you putt it and miss, and you sort of think like, why did I just do that fast? Like, why did I just throw it? I got nervous and I just freaked out. Whatever that is, that happens to people. So for me, it's just kind of taking my time and making sure that I'm thinking about, what I'm doing, being present in that moment, breathing, getting ready to make a putt. And for me, like, focus can be different things all the time. Like, I'll focus my aim on like a chain link or the pole or whatever, the center of the basket. But I find that there's like, whatever you want to say, 50 different aspects to what you could think about in putting, like your wrist position, your legs, whatever, where you're feeling like you're generating power. For me, I'm only ever thinking about 1 or 2 of those on any given day. And it just kind of comes from like, I go to the practice field, I'm warming up, I miss one low, then I'm like, gosh, use my legs. And then that whole day is kind of like, that's kind of on loop for me. So that's kind of how putting works for me, is that it's a different thing a lot of different times. I don't always think the same thing, because after like a whole tournament of saying use your legs, I don't have to think about it for 3 more months. because it's kind of been drilled in there, and now I'm using them real easy, and it's not something I really have to focus on. But then some other part of my putt will get a little bit sloppy, and that's just kind of how mine has always been, where I'm kind of just on a rotating schedule of like, oh shoot, make sure you're engaging your wrist a little bit, or just things like that. So that's kind of all stuff you're going to have to figure out on your own as you're putting, like what diagnosing what problem is causing you to miss in a certain way. But then in my focus phase, that's what I'm doing. I'm just kind of getting ready, making sure I'm breathing, and getting ready for phase 3, the load phase. But also just kind of keying in on whatever it is that day that I feel like I need to remember. Like the one part of my putt that's sloppy right now that's kind of getting lazy. Does that make sense? Okay. Phase 3, getting to the action, the loading phase. So Paul, you want to start it?
Sure. Like I just said before, the load phase for me is getting this back foot locked in, and once I got that balance, loading is when I'm coming back into my putt. For me, I like to shift my weight down. I don't rock back like some people. My weight goes down. So I'm loading downward, and when I'm putting, I always drop my hand first. So I let my hand come down to right about here, right at my chest, and then I start to load, depending on how long my putt is. It depends on how far back, my back foot might be.
Yeah, talk about how you move. Talk about how you move it.
Yeah, so my back foot, what I do with that is when I'm shorter, it's a little bit closer in shoulder width. But the further I go, my back foot comes back further, so I can go down more, and my arm can reach back more, so it can load backwards more and get more of an extension into my putt forward. You'll lose accuracy the further you go, but I will have that distance on most of my putts. So loading, bring this arm down first, and then I put my weight downwards so I can explode forward.
And kind of a signature Paul move is that he hit the end of his load phase is when he touches the putter to his off leg. So he's making, that's how he's changing that distance. It's changing a couple things. It's changing the width of his stance, but it's also changing the length of the drawback and the load movement of his arm. Because his leg is going to move farther and farther away, and then he keeps, whenever he touches it, that's when he's done with his load. So that's kind of just something that he does. It's a little different for a straddle putt. I do both, but generally I'm straddle putting mostly these days. So again, I'm also, by necessity, I'm not going back and forward because my feet are in a horizontal to the basket, so I can't really move back and forward. It's going to be a down and up kind of motion with the leg muscles. But it's going to be basically the same idea. I try to be pretty slow. I've just gotten done focusing. I always breathe in on the load, so that's just something that I'm always going to do. Is I'm going to get ready, and whenever I feel like my breathing's kind of in sync, I'm always going to go breathe in on the load, bend the legs, and that's going to always kind of get me ready for our 4th phase, which is our favorite phase, the Splode phase. So first, it's an important thing though, that one of the big problems we see is people who don't there's no differentiation between the load phase and the Splode phase. There's got to be a small pause. So the problem that we see from people is just getting the arm, straight down, straight out, too quick, and it kind of just like, you lose your aim, and you also, I think, tend to get the putter nose down a lot when you don't kind of take that time to sort of control the nose and get into the bottom of your swing, and then a different motion is the forward motion. So, difference between load and Splode.
Any reason you favor the straddle putt as opposed to foot forward?
It was just kind of a thing where for a long time I putted off one foot when I was close, like this. Sometimes I still do that when I'm really close. But for me, honestly, it was just like, I practiced both, and I've always practiced both. I was in a tournament in Oregon about 2 years ago, missed about 2 or 3 putts low, and I was like, I'm straddling the rest of the day. And here we are 2 years later.
Yeah, for me, when I'm usually having problems with my putt, I do go to straddle, so I can break it down a little bit more, because when I'm in a straddle motion, I focus more on my arm than my leg, so I can get that arm movement, which is the exact same no matter which way I'm standing. My arm movement is exactly the same, but I have to shift my weight a little bit differently. With the straddle, it's kind of, I feel like I rock more, yeah.
But we definitely both practice both stances. Like, I don't just because I straddle putt mostly doesn't mean I don't practice stagger putting when I'm out doing practice putting. And I'll teach you guys a little putting drill after we get done with the 5 phases that lets you work on both.
Paul, do you ever you bring it down? Do you keep it flat, or do you ever turn it in?
It's basically this thing.
So you keep it flat when it comes against your knee. It's not like ever comes.
Yeah,
down
it hits like midway down my thigh. that's just how I learned. I don't know why. So it's just been a habit ever since. But that's basically just me finishing that load phase when I hit here and then go forward.
I usually, when I'm teaching beginners or anyone really who wants to learn about putting, that's generally something I don't like to see, is people that drop the nose, because it just adds another small muscle situation where now you gotta change that at the very end. You gotta come back to level again. So I prefer to see people hold the putter at a fairly constant angle, locking the wrist a little bit. So I usually don't. I think that is another thing that kind of contributes to a nose down putt when you're going to let it drop this much. Because if you just kind of make that small millisecond error, you can have kind of a lot of variation in nose angle. Okay, phase 4, sploding. So this is. I was thinking this at the World Tour actually. I was just kept thinking, my little thing going through my head was load and splode. So that's kind of what I've been using lately. But
Southern accent.
yeah, that's because now that I moved to North Carolina, now I don't say the X part, I just say splode. But anyway, this is kind of what you're building to with the loading phase. Putting is a delicate thing, but you still use the big muscles in your body and your legs. So what we showed you, coming into this spot, for me, I'm breathing in, going here, I'm going to have a short pause, and then the splode part is really pretty explosive. It's kind of a little bit more aggressive than I think people might think. If you're good at it, it's going to look pretty smooth, but you have to put a decent amount of effort into a longer putt. So for me, I'm going to be breathing in all the way down to here, and then I'm going to pretty forcefully go and stand up into the putt and make sure I'm extending out my shot, exploding open my hand. So right here, like if I'm gripping a putter, I'm like at 2 o'clock or so, if you're imagining it as a clock. When I get all the way in through the load, I'm up at like 12. My wrist kind of curls in a little bit. All the spin that I need comes from going from there just to open. So that's kind of like explode right to there, but not beyond.
Yeah,
but I want to hit my line.
What I learned when I first started was actually from my grandpa. He was a bowler, and he used to shake hands with the pin. That's exactly what I learned putting, shaking hands with the basket. There's no like extending that wrist or anything like that. It's just that up and down motion of opening your hand.
Yep.
Shaking hands with the basket.
And that's where your spin comes from. It's just going from a closed hand that's kind of like a wrist in to just pop, opening up the hand into a straight handshake sort of position. Is that kind of making some sense? Okay, good. Yeah.
As far as I have a shoulder injury from snowboarding that was affecting me when I very first started playing, and what I've realized is that with the way the surgery that I need to have happen, which I'm not going to do, whatever, but it prevents me from creating the snap that I need outside of the circle to be able to get the disc to go. Like for me, what I've been doing is I've been throwing the disc higher to have it come in, but if you have tree cover or anything like that, you can't do that putt. And so what I was wondering is, what I found recently, one of my friends said, well, why don't you put your finger underneath the disc? And I started trying it. It seems to be helping a lot. When you grip the disc, I had it like that at first, and then he showed me to have it underneath so that you can create the snap a little bit more.
Absolutely.
I was wondering if that's what you do when you're putting, if you have the finger underneath slightly.
I definitely do. I like this first little digit, that crease right there is right under the rim, like locked in right there. So, and then I'm feeling in my grip. There's this pinch as well on the flight plate. So those are kind of the main points of my grip. Is that one's locked in, and these ones are pinching here. And then these two are kind of loose. They're just sort of keeping the disc in my palm, not letting it get away from my palm.
Is that middle finger the last release point when you let it go?
I would expect so, but you're talking about a pretty millisecond, like slow motion camera type thing. But I would expect that's probably one of the last contact points.
Flatter maybe.
Yeah. It helps you control the angle to have your fingers spread out. That's for sure. If you're like this, it's kind of hard to do. A push putt can't really happen from like a power grip because you're going to just kind of flop the disc under.
Yeah, for me, I keep my finger outside, like you were saying the first time. That's just how I learned. I feel like I can control the putter that way, control the rotation. But if I'm really far out, like 60, 70, 80 feet out, I will slide that finger under a little bit for more rotations on the disc. I do lose accuracy for me personally. But yeah, I slide that under if I'm really far out for jump putt. This is the last one.
Okay, Okay, yeah, on to our final phase, which we sort of hinted at, follow-through phase. So this is kind of where you get into that shake hands with the basket thing. This is another problem that I see a lot, is people, in the same way that you can rush have no difference between load and Splode, people will putt and then pull the punch right back, then drop their hand immediately. This is another thing that's going to mess with nose angle more than anything else, I think, because you get out there onto your putt and you're kind of like yanking back away from it as soon as it comes out of your hand, and I feel like you end up accidentally imparting a little bit of that to the disc sometimes. So that when I see people that do that, I feel like their main miss is sort of like a nose down really hard into the cage. People that do a putt that's like, and they're really being quick about it. Small motions. The other time that this happens is when you're nervous. People get nervous and they kind of like tense up and they try to make the putt. That you get like scared to be like big and smooth. People want to just kind of like, you know, just like a really little motion, and that's not going to be good. So you got to be able to kind of trust yourself to go through the whole thing, and you're going to Splode out and then full follow through to reach and shake hands like Paul said. And that's going to give you that control over the nose, and it's going to give you that full height and flight on your putts as well.
Yeah, and what I want to add to the follow through as well, a lot of people when they putt, they bring their leg up. When I'm putting, I'm bringing my leg up and my momentum's going forward. I see a lot of people when they putt, they swing it out to, you know, their right, or they swing it out to their left. That's going to pull your putt right or left. You know, so you want your momentum going forward and upwards to get that putt up in the air. So for me, when I'm missing putts right or left, it's usually because I'm swinging my weight instead of pushing it forward. So that's another thing with follow through, is the legs are a big part of it. You know, you want to follow through forward, not left or right, because it's going to pull your putt that way.
I have a similar, from the straddle, the issue for me that's similar to that is if I get a little bit tired or a little bit lazy, I'll find myself, instead of equally loading on both legs, I'll go and let one knee come in a little bit, and I find I putt worse when I do that. Miss my line, so I try to make sure, it's just a kind of a laziness thing, I feel like, is when he's going to be doing something like that, it's just, or if I'm doing this, it's just a little bit of a shortcut, and it can end up kind of like your legs are getting a little tired, so for some reason it feels a little better to let one knee come in or to do whatever. But that's what kind of practicing and being able to have a little bit of training will avoid having that fatigue or making those kind of laziness-based mistakes. Any kind of final questions about any of the steps?
Height of leg lift. Would you say it's important versus a little leg lift versus going a lot higher?
I think that's just balance on your part.
Because I think I noticed you throw your leg a little higher than most people, it seems like, when I pay attention to that.
Leg
Seems
lift.
like I watch a lot of the videos online, so I'm like, notice when Paul makes putts, his leg's like, ah.
Leg lift is, the reason that there's leg lift is for a counterweight.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be proportional. You know, if he's putting a lot of energy forward, he's going to need a high leg lift to not have a falling putt. So the reason that you're lifting your leg is just to make sure you can come back. So it's just going to be about how much of your weight is forward. You need that much weight in the back. So I don't know if it's necessarily indicative of a good putter,
Of course, yeah.
or if it's just going to be something that you got to find your comfort zone with.
Something that I've noticed is I watch
Here, I'll let this train go.
Something that I've noticed as I'm watching you guys online is that a lot of times your guys' putts, it's almost like it sets into the basket. Whereas like when I'm putting, I've found that like I aim for the middle of the chains and I'll like try to throw to a point slightly beyond the basket so that I don't screw up and it'll connect, and then you have chain outs and stuff. With you guys, when you're aiming, are you specifically through your practice, you're trying to set the disc into the basket, or are you trying to hit dead center chains with a little bit of
We're
force?
definitely trying to hit the chains. The chains are there for a reason. They're a fantastic idea. You know that's what disc golf is really. It's a game about hitting chains, not a game about making baskets.
Yeah. So
Generally, you want your putt to have enough forward energy to go in from a variety of distances. Like a putt from 18 feet will probably also go in from 22 feet if you're hitting the chains. If you're too focused on like dropping it in, then an 18-footer only goes in from 18 feet. And then you're putting added difficulty on yourself that you don't need to be having. Also, it's going to be weaker through the wind. if you're putting that slow.
Yeah. I was just gonna say a little thing with that is always remember putt through it, not to it.
Yeah, I like that one.
Is there a sweet spot that on the change that you'd like to aim for, as opposed to like dead pull, or are you going slightly to the left or the right? Is that based off an individual's game? What's a good way to indicate sweet spot?
For me, I personally just always aim at the center of the pole, and maybe just a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but it's always on line with the pole. That gives me the most, if I miss it right or miss it left, I can miss it the same amount either way.
Yeah. My thing with that is like, Paul's the best player in the world. I'm up there. We're some of the best players there are. And I feel like I don't want to kid myself about how good at putting am I. Like I don't really want to be like, oh, I aim for the right side about 60%. Like I just go for the middle. And if you hit the middle, they're probably going to go in. I feel like getting a little too worried about, oh, I need to aim for this little spot. It can be
I've heard people like
overthinking.
pick a link and
Yeah,
like.
well, I sometimes pick a link, but it's going to be right in the middle. I just go for the thickest, biggest part. Sometimes I like to kind of look at a link, especially when I'm having trouble with high and low, and just kind of more trust my muscle memory and sort of just like focus in on that spot, and then just sort of, when you kind of let other stuff fall away, kind of end up hitting that distance a little bit easier.
I think
but I don't pick side to side.
my biggest problem is I notice if I'm off on putting and I'm putting slightly left, I'll typically try to compensate for it by aiming to a link or so right of the pole. Do you think that's a better strategy as opposed to just finding out why I'm putting left? And
It's like a
fixing
short-term, you're talking about a short-term fix.
that? A Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Yeah, I mean, it's good on that day in the tournament, you don't have any other option.
Right.
So then you do whatever you can. But if that's a consistent issue, you're probably starting to talk about some of the twisting that Paul's talking about, or some misunderstanding of where your body actually is in space. Like you sort of think you're aiming where you're going, but if you saw it like on video straight from ahead, maybe you aren't actually aiming where you think you are.
You still have a question back there?
Yeah, sorry to put you guys on the spot, but can you demonstrate a putt for us?
Sure.
Can you real quick tell us though, what kind of adjustments you make when you're on a hill? Like if you're on the side of the hill and you're trying to putt, like at La Mirada, there's some of that stuff where you're way at the bottom trying to putt up to that stuff or down at it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for me, it changes my, how aggressive I'm going to be. If I'm uphill, I'm likely to be more aggressive. Obviously, you have to throw it harder to go uphill, but also you're less worried about the comeback putt because you're going against gravity. Downhill's the opposite. Downhill, you have to be a little bit more delicate, and you have to think more about the angle that the disc is landing on, because if you putt with a bunch of hyzer down a hill, it's going to get up and go rolling all the way to the bottom of the hill. But the other thing that I think about on hills is just to have the balance of the stance is a really important thing. Because you get on a big side hill and people will like stand only on the one leg, and they'll forget about getting like set. And sometimes it's slippery, and you just have to take your time to like kind of just don't worry about rushing yourself. Just make sure you can get into a spot where you're dug in and you can be athletic.
Cool.
Oh boy, yeah. A little short putt.
You demonstrate an 80-footer.
We'll do a couple 80-footers real quick.
Yo, Nate.
Can we see you guys play horse?
Hey, what about like jump putts? What do you guys like? Any tips for like jumping up?
Well, jump putting is an important skill, I think. It's basically what you're allowing yourself to do is take more from your legs when you don't have to worry about controlling your follow through and preventing that falling putt. As far as like specific tips, what issue are you having, or can you kind of guide me a little bit more on that?
No, I mean I jump. I try and keep the same form. I'm not like crazy good at them, but
Sure.
I just wondered if you guys had anything other than just inside the 30.
I think it just takes practice, and you just want to be able to, you want to be able to just be able to harness that extra energy out of your legs. For me, I'm jumping out of a straddle when I'm in close, and I generally like go into a straight into that, but that's not why I'm good at it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just something you have to practice. The other thing that I usually tell people is, in my opinion, long putting is the least important skill in disc golf. So it's fun, but I very rarely does the long putting performance decide who wins and who loses. I think it's the least important thing you could possibly do in disc golf. The least important thing you could practice.
You're talking about long putting, like outside the circle?
But yeah, 50 footers, least important. Being good at 50 footers is the least important thing you could possibly be good at. It's fun because you get to pump your fist and get people fired up. But as far as who wins and who loses, rarely is that the decider, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's one of those things where you're more likely to miss a 50-footer than make it, so just get as close as possible.
I just think about trying to put it in a good area. If it goes in, I do a fist pump. but I'm not like thinking, oh, I'm definitely making this from 60 feet. I just try to put it in a good airspace and see if it can go in.
Yeah. We have time for one more question.
You guys, you might have to give the company answer here, but is there one kind of basket you prefer over another for putting?
All I can tell you is that this isn't a company answer, but it is the Innova basket.
Yeah,
I like the
Innova
disc catcher, yellow band disc catchers are my favorite.